full name is William Edward Alli, and I was born in the worst year of the Depression, 1932, in the city that suffered the most in the Depression, Detroit, Michigan.
What did your parents do?
I grew up with a mother from Appalachia who came up from eastern Tennessee, lived in an apartment house, and there she met a Turkish immigrant. And this Turkish immigrant, my father, had been a soldier the year before World War I, when his unit was assigned to garrison duty in Yemen, which was then a province of the Ottoman Empire. He did not go to Yemen, but on his own came to America. His unit was annihilated in Yemen the following year. Our brother, Sergeant Bekir, also in the Ottoman Turkish Army, was killed. So war of some sort, even going back to my mother's side where she had ancestors on both sides of the Civil War, is in my background. But they met, got married, got divorced, but I got a chance to see my father at least once a week and develop the knowledge of his language, his culture and background. And so I am, in effect, a Turkish American. But since he was from the hills of the eastern area, past the Euphrates River, he was a Turkish hillbilly. My mother was an American hillbilly from Appalachia. So I'm a Turkish American double hillbilly.
And did you have any siblings who served in the military?
I did not. I have a younger sister, but she did not have any military service. Nowadays, things have changed.
So what were you doing before enlisting?
I was in high school, and there was a Marine Reserve unit that was looking for people to join, and some guy who was with them talked me into joining, so I joined. I would go for training one night a week, couple hours. I would get paid for my time, and in summer I'd have the equivalent of a vacation by going possibly to a different state where there was a military base, a Marine base, get intensive training, and then my intention was to start school, meaning college, in September 1950. I graduated from high school in June 1950, and I went to work in an automobile factory, which is what Detroit used to be. And I worked on the assembly line, the graveyard shift, that's midnight. And lo and behold, all the reservists were swooped up by order of the Department of Defense, and we all were on trains, and we went to the West Coast, and that was the start of my military service.
So what month was that?
It was the last day of August, 1950. It took several days to get to California, and in California, they did the sorting out. They did the version of selection the way doctors do in nurses by something called triage. So they separated us into those who needed the least training, got 2 weeks and went over. Those who could get by on 4 weeks went over. And I hadn't even fired a weapon, never been to a summer encampment. So I went to boot camp, then to advanced infantry training, and then I was on a troop ship that left in the middle of February 1951, And by the first week of March, after stopping in Japan briefly, I was in Korea.
So why did you choose the Marines when you enlisted?
I chose the Marines because they were the ones that had an organization based nearest my house. My father didn't have anything to do with my choice. If anything, he would have told me, don't go into any military service. But I simply chose it. But I had done something interesting. In the school library, I got a hold of a thick book about the United States Marines in World War II. Thick, action-packed. And I read it, and I read it. That was a big, thick book. That may have inclined me to have an attraction to the Marines. I can't say, though. I would say proximity.
So once you got to training, how long were you there, and what was it like? What was it like adjusting?
Well, I had been in the Boy Scouts. My father was a strict man, so I wasn't living any life of indiscipline. I had no problem whatsoever. I had been in high school ROTC. So what happened was we went to boot camp, and instead of 11 weeks, or even longer, they shortened it to 8 because they had to get us overseas. And then about 2 weeks before Christmas, I got Christmas leave so that I could get home, get back before Christmas. And I had advanced infantry training. That lasted 6 weeks. So I had 8 weeks boot camp, 6 weeks advanced infantry training, got on the ship. Not a lot. I felt I really wasn't trained well because I didn't get enough. But they needed us, and off we went.
Where did you ship out from?
Shipped out from San Diego. Went to Kobe, Japan. They gave us about 8 hours.
When did you actually ship to Korea?
8 hours. 8 hours later. It was overnight. And we landed in Busan. I learned later it was the land of the morning calm. It was morning. It was calm. But there was quite a different smell as we came down the gangplank. The people were in rags practically. Things were dirty and drab looking. And we marched down the gangplank, and then we formed up. I guess we got some more ammo. And then we marched to the train station. Got on the train, went as far north as the train could go, where the track was safe. Then we got off. Then we clambered onto trucks. Then the trucks took us up, actually to near Hongsong. And it was dark. So we got off the trucks. We were the 6th replacement draft. And they told us to sleep there. There was still some snow on the ground, so we put our ponchos down and we slept. And the next morning, some NCOs came over. They said, okay, you're with Dog Company. You're with Easy. You're with Fox. Come with me. And I was then to become a machine gun ammo carrier. I never stopped to ask, why are so many of the vacancies being filled by us having to do with machine guns? Later I learned. Didn't last too long. My first night There were tracers being shot by both sides. We learned the red tracers were ours, the green tracers were theirs. I had to go down in front of the line and get into a hole and watch and listen for the enemy. And that would give advance warning to the rest of the guys back there. But then we started the next day, because the enemy was withdrawing. They had inflicted awful loss on the army in that area. But then I got used to carrying. They gave me 2 cans of about 25 pounds each. And they gave me a type of strap to put over my shoulder and hook onto that. And that ammo was not mine. It belonged to the gun, the machine gun. I also had my rifle. I had my own ammo. I had my rations in the canteen. And my job was, when they yelled to me, "Get up here with the ammo," I would have to take the ammunition up to them and hand it to the assistant gunner who was feeding the gun, and then come back down and defend the gun from any harm or any action that might be coming our way. I was a machine gun ammo carrier. Beast of burden would have been a better term.
So what were some of the campaigns that you were part of?
Well, I remember we were coming down into a valley of rice paddies. They were pretty much dried out. The farmers had fled. And we're going across, and we get shot at by some snipers. So remembering my training, I hit the ground. My can of machine gun ammo, which is on a belt, like that, broke open and spread all over. So I opened it up and started to fill it. Corporal Punty, "Forget the ammo," and he used some obscenities. "Leave the ammo. We can replace the ammo. We can't replace you." And the mistake I had made was hitting the ground, but it was not explosions, people up in the hill. So if I'm on the ground not moving, hey, perfect target. We started running, got to the other side of a draw, and in were trees. We're covering a hill, and we got there and we started to climb up, and a thunderstorm took place. The rain was so heavy we had to hang on to the trees and try and reach for the next one and help each other up, pull our way all the way up to the top of the hill. And then we had to dig foxholes, which filled up rapidly with water. So I inflated my air mattress, which floated on the water, and I lay down there. Unfortunately, I fell asleep. I wasn't on guard, but I floated on that water in the foxhole. Now, if the enemy had to come, but they couldn't, they were just as handicapped as we were under those conditions, they would have shot me, and my mattress would have sunk, and I would have drowned. So I can honestly say that I had a good night's sleep, and at no time did I ever get seasick.
Can you kind of tell me broad picture, or what was your journey?
Well, what happened was before the first battle, in the middle of the night, I had to leap out of my foxhole because of diarrhea, because you share your foxhole. So you have to get out to do something. And then I started vomiting. And so stuff was coming out of both ends, and I lost all my strength. I couldn't carry any machine gun ammo the next day. And they told me to get back to sick bay. Sick bay, see, we use naval terms in the Marines. So I crawled back to where the slope went down, and then I rolled down the slope sideways. And then some guys saw me down there from the first aid station. They put me on a stretcher. And then they took me to a Jeep that was fitted to have stretchers. And they took off with me, took me back to the Naval Hospital. And I was out of it. And I don't know if they fed me intravenously. I don't know what happened. I do remember that somebody was saying to the nurse, a corpsman, Army calls them medics, they're all Navy. A corpsman said to the officer, the doctor, you know that captain they brought in last night? He died last night. Okay, so they moved him out. I thought, here I am, back among wounded, and I'm here just because of what was happening to my innards, and I felt ashamed that with that, I was back among men who had gotten shot up and who were dying. And I actually felt ashamed, but it was a shameful illness that I couldn't avoid. I couldn't have gone into combat. After several days, I got back up on the line, and they had moved. And it was Easter. But I had had my own resurrection of health. And then we continued advancing. The Chinese were pulling back. And we went straight up what is the main supply route on the East Central Front, Hong Song, Hong Chon, Chun Chon, up near Imje Chorwan and those places. And then we knew they were launching a big offensive. And they attacked. And they attack at night. And you hear see the flares, and you hear the whistles and the trumpets and all that business. And what they did is some of our guys had to retreat back from their forward positions, and they called us up as stretcher bearers. So we have somebody on the stretcher. We have to take him back to an aid station, and while we're carrying this guy, we see our planes, Corsairs, making a big turn. Well, during that kind of combat, you can't be sure if you're a pilot of what your target really is, even though panels are put out, reflective panels. And we're carrying this guy, and I look, and I notice how the pilot of the Corsair kept turning more and more till he was facing us. And then he started coming at us. I said, oh my God, he's going to strafe us. So we got this poor guy, 4 of us. We get him just over the edge. We set him down. We said, look, we're going to go a little bit farther, but we'll be back for you after that plane goes. And at the last minute, the plane swerved away. But he could have been strafing us, and we could have been killed. But here's the thing. Now the Chinese were overwhelming our defenses, and it was getting dark. And we had to go down the steep hill, and I'm carrying machine gun ammo, my weapon. Down there is the river. It's springtime. It's cold, and it's swift running. And we get down there, and our planes are flying overhead, dropping parachute flares so we can see what to do. And the engineers had strung cables to the other side. So we're holding the stuff up like that, and we go in, and it was so cold that what happens to males is at a certain extremity gets brought straight up into the abdominal cavity practically. That's what happens. You get it from fear, too, as a male. And we're trying to bob our way, hanging on with one to get to the other side. And the official Marine Corps literature says chest high. Yeah, for tall guys, the little guys were bobbing, and we would help them. Got to the other side, and we went up the steep side. There we were soaked totally, but we had no time. We're not going to change. We're on the road, and we're going back to the town we had come through, Chuncheon. And that was the way. It had all the makings of a Hollywood drama, a Wagnerian opera, those flares, and then the explosions, because we were blowing up our ammo that was left there. And it was dramatic. But our general said that of all the activities of the 1st Marine Division, that one, which is the most difficult, a retreat to maintain order, was done the most skillfully and in the finest way and with the minimum of casualties. And I say thank you, General Smith. God bless you, wherever you are. Then there was the, we moved up, and then we had to take a hill, 676. And they yelled for my buddy, get up here with the gun. I was the ammo carrier. He goes up, and he gets a bullet, goes, and I run up to help him. I'd never seen a red as bright as what was gushing from him. And I helped him down. And I helped him down to the aid station. A helicopter took him out to the Navy ship, hospital ship. And the doctor told him, Randy, if it had been a millimeter closer, that bullet, you wouldn't have survived. And he was my foxhole buddy for a while. Had been before that. He died in June. But years later, after we got back, his daughter thanked me for saving his life. So that made me feel very good. That was Hill 676, and then the division had support assignment, so we were pulled offline. And during that time, we did intensive training. And I decided, I got a letter from my father. My father was a Turkish immigrant, and his cousin wrote to him to get my address. And then once he got my address, he sent me a letter in Korea. He said, Turkish troops are now brothers with Americans. Go visit them. So since we were not online, I got permission to go visit the Turks. And because my father spoke Eastern Turkish, which is very much like Azeri Turkish, Azerbaijan was part of the Soviet Union. And some Azeri troops obviously were in the Soviet Army. And there was a rumor that the communists were going to use captured American uniforms with Eastern European troops, communists, to infiltrate our lines. Plus, when I hitchhiked over to visit the Turks unannounced, I borrowed a belt, I didn't want to carry my rifle. It's too heavy. So I asked Tex to let me have his pistol, and he gave me an old cavalry pistol, leather, pivots, hangs from the horse. Nobody's using it, that's Tex. The only people who used leather for holsters or belts were the commies. That was the only one used by any non-communist, and I had it on when I went to visit the Turks, and I mixed up some of the Korean I was learning. They arrested me, and I thought I was going to be executed. Years later, as a State Department employee, when I went to Turkey, the Turkish veterans of the Korean War made me an honorary member. It was much safer in that ceremony than the first time I met them when I thought I was going to lose my life. After the summer, we went back up online to the Punch Bowl. And the Punch Bowl, you can kind of like, had been huge volcanic activity eons of time ago. And we went up the right flank. The Army went up the left flank. And that's where we fought very bloody battles. I write several chapters about Hill 749. And then, so at the end of 7 months, maybe because I had been able to show my ability with language, because we had Koreans who were helping carry things, and I interacted, learned a few things. I was put in charge of several hundred Koreans. These were civilian workers. They carried ammo up to the front, dug various things. And so I became Genghis Khan. In other words, I had my friends were watching what had happened. I was no longer lugging that damn ammo, and they saw me building this Asian army, and they wondered what I was up to. They were called the Korean Service Corps, and they were very valuable to us. After that, I was going with them, leading them up to the front to deliver various supplies, and had the thrill of being able to look out with my binoculars past the communist positions. And remember, if you look at the front, on the east, the front line, which became the truce line, was farther north of the 38th than on the west. And from there I could see Kumgangsan, the legendary home of the Korean royalty. And the jagged rocks, a place almost mysterious, and I could make it out. And I said to my interpreter, "What's that?" He says, "Kumgangsan. That's his great place for our people." Of course, couldn't get there, and the North Koreans gouged the South Korean tourists who want to go there to this legendary place. But I saw Kumgangsan. Then finally I got rotated out, end of March, and came back on the transport. This time they gave us more time in Kobe. And I bought some Chinaware for my mother. Service for 8. Fine Chinaware in wooden boxes, certain kind of stiff padding. And I asked some friends, help me get this to the ship. And we got it to the ship and took it on. And by the time we landed in Treasure Island, I was able to take it to the post office there. And it was sent to my mother. She had it as long as she lived. And a week ago, I ate on it at my son's house because my son and his daughter-in-law have that Chinaware from Kobe that I brought back.
Just going back real quick, so when the Turks arrested you,
yes,
how did you get away?
I didn't get away. Before I left, I had to have permission from my unit. I said, I want to go visit the Turks. They said, why? My dad's cousin, etc. It's good for morale, you know, unity of the UN forces. And he sent me a book. The book, my Turkish wasn't good then, it's much better. The book was not for Americans to learn Turkish, because there was no such book in the small town, dinky town where he lived. But he did find one for Turks to learn English, and he sent it to me. All the explanations are in Turkish of English grammar and all this. And I couldn't do that. I got it mixed up. And even some of the Korean. They tell you never learn two languages at the same time. And that's but they typed up the orders and I had permission. And I had them in my pocket. And when they arrested me and I said, well, in my pocket, I have orders. And the American interpreter pulled them out. He says, squat in the corner. They took away my pistol. Why do you have leather? Oh, well, Tex, this is an old cavalry. Really? Okay. Anyway, they took that. And as he went out, he says, we're going to check on you. And we're going to nail your ass. I thought, this is it. My mother's going to get the telegram. Your son was accidentally whatever, or is missing, or whatever, and I'm going to die like this at 21. No, at 19. This is how my life is going to end. And then there's the longest period. I think I squatted for a year. Actually, I squatted long enough because Westerners are not used to squatting. And then when I hear this footsteps, firing squad. That's what it is, the firing squad. Flap is thrown over. While I was squatting, I could hear the sentries out there too. They came in with smiles. The Turks were smiling. the interpreter said, well, we checked on you, you're okay. And so the Turks treated me like the long-lost prodigal son, because my father was a Turk. Any descendant of any Turk, however many centuries or continents away, is automatically part of the tribe. So they took me up on a stage, they assembled all the troops, and they said, Alli, they call me Alli, say something to them. So I said, Merhaba, which is hello. They all screamed, Saul, which is the response, and I jumped back and almost fell off. They roared with laughter. When their commander says Merhaba, their reply is be strong, which is Saul. And apparently I was putting on a performance for them, not expecting that. I got soul food for several days, Turkish soul food, real, lots of bread, dipping everything in the broth and stuff like that. I slept with them. They have raised platforms that they slept on, head to foot, all the way around the inside. And they exchanged gifts with me. They gave me some daggers. So after the war, years later, I went and I stayed in 1953 at the home of one of the Turkish soldiers and his wife. But later, after I became a U.S. government employee and did an official tour there, they made me an honorary member of Kors Savaş, Korean War veterans of Turkey, something like that.
Can you say again what unit and regiment?
Certainly. When I arrived, I became part of a machine gun unit, which is part of weapons company. But they're farmed out to the different infantry platoons. We were attached to dog company. Now, it's Delta. But then it was more cultured. It was dog company. And so we had a gunner, an assistant gunner, and then the ammo carriers, about 4 or 5. And I was with them until November. So I arrive in March, and I'm with the machine gun unit as part of weapons company, detailed to dog company. And then when it came time to take me out and make me, we were, at that time, we were brought up to be racists. That's the way we were trained in Detroit. And if you're trained in California, it was against Asians. If you're brought up in Detroit, it's against African Americans and things like that. And so we had terms, and we called the Asians gooks. The laugh was on us because gook is a Korean word used for nationality. And American is miguk. It's not a derogatory term. It's a part of their language. They call the Chinese Chungguk. So in a way, we Americans were gooks, not knowing how to use the word correctly. But that made me, I was called the informal name. Well, the official name was Civilian Labor Supervisor. They called me the gook herder, because I had all these guys, and I had to corral them and order them to do this and carry stuff up. And it was so funny. I told my wife, there are certain things you just don't say. But I was called the gook herder. And I stayed in that. And then they gave me a promotion. And I ended up as a buck sergeant. And all the time, I'm not, from November on, I'm not in action. I'm in the equivalent of supply, and stuff like that. And so I thought, well, what is my military occupational specialty? I found out that after I left, I carried the equivalent of a tattoo saying machine gunner 0330 because I was continued to be 0330 machine gunner. I was a machine gun unit leader working with these Korean laborers. So when I came back to America, I couldn't get into any Marine infantry units. They were all gone. They had gone to Korea. But there was a Marine air unit stationed at a naval air station. So I reported. I said, here, I have to stay in the reserves till I finish. And they looked at, you're a machine gun unit leader. Yeah. We don't have the position. We handle planes. I said, well, what are you going to do? They said, we'll make you an air intelligence NCO. Okay, I'm an air intelligence NCO. What kind of training do I get? We don't have money for training. I'm an air intelligence. What do I do? Read, study? 2 weeks after I was discharged, I knew there was going to be another war with the Soviet Union, and this time I'd go in comfort. I wouldn't have to go up and pass out on every mountain. I went to the Air Force base, and I joined the Air Force Reserve, and they saw I was a 3-striper, which to them in the Air Force was equivalent to a 4-striper, so they made me a staff sergeant. I said, what's my job? They said, Air Intelligence NCO. Well, where do I get training? Well, we don't have the money for the training. Later, they made me an Air Intelligence Officer. Well, what kind of training do I? We don't have any. So I ended up as an Air Intelligence Officer at a United States Air Force base. After all the going through the Marines, after all that, and that pretty much after, by about 1960, I completed my Air Force Reserve requirement, and that was it. I was out of the military.
When did you rotate home from Korea?
I rotated home from Korea started the end of March, 51. That's when the trucks took us to the seaport on the East Coast. Those trucks, when they went back, were then going to take the entire division all the way across the peninsula to Seoul. So we were the last ones to be in Gangwon-do province, the Alpine region. They'd be there on flatter terrain against much heavier enemy artillery and other force, and they would actually have more losses over a sustained period of time in what was called the Battle of the Outposts. But I knew none of that. And I got home. I landed on April 10th, 1952, which was Good Friday, a very Good Friday. My family was there and greeted me, and their ordeal was over. When you are in war, if you can shut down your mind, you can survive mentally. I was able to do it, not knowing that my parents were crawling up the wall. Years later, my 2 sons, who joined the Marines, were in the first Gulf War, and that became my 9-month nervous breakdown. But I was back on Good Friday, April 10th. I took vacation, you might say. Worked in the auto factory about 4 months. Then started under the GI Bill at Wayne State University in Detroit. And I met my wife there in Psychology 101. And we got married. And then I was offered a government job. So in 1958, I started my government career in the Washington area.
And what all did you do with that?
I was hired as an economist and worked for the Bureau of Labor Statistics and dealt with the impact of automation, which was bringing in computers and other technological advances, and finding the impact on labor requirements, impact on productivity. And then after 5 years there, I went overseas to Pakistan as a Foreign Service officer. There were two Pakistans, in East Pakistan and West Pakistan. It was before the war with India and the split between the two Pakistans. And there I worked in Lahore, which was the capital of West Pakistan, Rudyard Kipling's city. He was the British poet of empire, of imperialism. I was in his city, my wife and I, and dealt with planning, budgeting, things of that sort, making inspections. And we decided to stay only 2 years. So a short while before the end of the 2 years, India and Pakistan went to war. And since I was in Lahore, the front was 20 miles away. You could hear the firing, and we couldn't get out for a couple of weeks. Finally, we got out. Hercules C-130s took us to Iran. It was before the crazies took over in Iran. And then I got a chance to visit some of my relatives in eastern Turkey for the first time. She visited her relatives in Greece for the first time. Then we went to Germany, and in Germany we spent time in Bavaria, a quickened vacation, then took train to Le Havre in the SS United States across the Atlantic, riding with the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. They didn't talk to us. And then I got a new job. It was the war on poverty. And I worked in manpower development planning, working with the states, giving grants and figuring out the kind of training that was needed. And then I went back to AID in 1970, and I worked till 1996. And I was in management. For a while, I was in population and family planning. That was not designed as therapy for me because we had 4 kids by then, but rather it was an actual program. And we helped other nations that have problems with runaway population growth, improve maternal health, child health, develop their doctor, nurse, other skills, and then ended up in dealing with waste, fraud, and abuse and setting management controls in place to prevent it, things like that. Then I retired in 1996, and at my going away party at the hotel, my son showed up with a big brown wrapper of something. And when it was time to give me my gifts, he came over and he opened up this huge picture of the Korean War Veterans Memorial that he had taken. It's on the brochure I gave you. It was the first snowfall following the 1995 dedication. He took it and he gave it to me. And that was my present. And on the 50th anniversary of the end of the Korean War, his picture, which had been purchased by the United States Postal Service, was put on 75 million first-class postage stamps. And he got an award on stage from the Deputy Secretary of Defense. And I was there with my wife. We're so proud of him. And there were some Turks there. And I had been in contact with them. And I organized the American and Turkish Veterans Association. And at the Turkish Embassy, we had gave them a hosting, and we read a poem, and we had them read. And I would read the English stanza. One would read the Turkish, English, Turkish, and it's from Korea, the cemetery of the United Nations at Busan. Because in the year 2000, when I was working with the return visit to Korea, I went to the United Nations cemetery. And there in the Turkish section was a plaque which had a poem in Turkish that had been sent over to be placed there. And I have that in my book, and it is in the words of a martyr who is sleeping beneath the soil in Busan. And it starts about talking about the life, and then the action, and finally one night being wounded and his life's blood ebbing away, and resting now in Busan, and telling his people back in his home country, my father's home country, my ancestral home country, you who are lying there for wars or previous things for Turkey, you have died for my Turkiye, and I, with the UN, have died for the world. So we read that. And then it came time for me to write my book. And I did all the research, and I thought, well, I can't write just about myself. I'll write other actions that my friends had been in, and I'll research it and get information from them. So it reflects my 1st Marine Division, my Marine Corps pride, and a filling out of the story of the Korean War, certainly from the Marines' point of view. And I read about the Chosin Reservoir, which had ended 11 weeks before I arrived. And after I had done my research, I went to my friends. I said, I joined after you had gotten back from Chosin. You never talked about it. You never said we were great. You never said we suffered. You didn't say anything. Why not? They said, we didn't want to talk about it. I says, it's been over 50 years. I'm writing a book. I'm one of you. I know a lot about it from research, but I want you to talk about it for me to write. I will change your name. I'll fictionalize your name. When I give your background, I'll fictionalize where you were born, what your wife's name is, your family. I'll do all that, but I will put the essence of your experience. So here's what happened. I wrote a chapter 12, and that's what I'm going to bring to you shortly, the excerpt. And when I was done writing about what they had been through, I was emotionally drained. And I thought, okay, I've done chapter 12. I have to do chapter 13. No, I can't go to chapter 13. I've got to honor these men. How do you honor the dead? Most of them are dead. I'll do what the ancient scribes did, the bards. I will write a poem. What is my academic qualification for writing poetry? Economist? Statistician? But I can count syllables. I know what rhyming is. I'll write about that and about our heroic leader, Oliver P. Smith. And I cried as I was writing that. And I'd like to tell it to you now, if I may. It's short. And I said, down to the sea with O.P. Smith. From frozen heights and reservoir where death had ruled the scenes, down to the welcome eastern sea came O.P. Smith's Marines. The U.S. Navy had its ships waiting to give their praise to the 1st Marine Division exiting winter's maze. Not bloody corpses in the snow, but victors, grim and free. Shortly they'd fight the foe again, these soldiers of the sea. Carry them onward, O ocean, to Busan on your waves. Don't claim these Marines, but keep them safe from watery graves. Down from Chosin, some say Changjin, 80 miles, I would say. General Smith and a few good men in history had their day.
When you returned home, what was the reception like?
Most people didn't know I'd been gone. One guy I was working with says, "You weren't in Korea," because I was very youthful looking. I didn't look like I had been old enough to be in the war. And I just happened to have proof on me, and I showed it. And he was surprised. I did try. At that time, I wasn't quite 21. So I was off of active duty, but I could not go into a bar. I could not own a weapon. And I couldn't own my own car. My mother would have to sign for me. And I could not vote in the election. All that changed when I turned 21. But I'd shot a lot of weapons. And I wasn't allowed to get a permit to carry a weapon. Couldn't go into a bar. Not that I cared that much about drinking. And couldn't own my own car. My mother's willing to sign. And I couldn't vote.
So how do you feel like your wartime experiences have affected your life?
I feel that my life is a bonus. Each day is a bonus. It's a bonus. I don't get into theological concerns about why me, why them. No. I'm given a gift, not a promise you're going to have today, but in the future. No. The gift of today exists now. Each one is meaningful to me. I felt that at first I felt I was almost, by the way I drove the car, immortal. My terrified parents finally got me to slow down. I was more mature when some of the fraternity brothers tried to get me to join a fraternity. Come on, guys. I felt like I wanted to know more about my dad and his culture. I wanted to work in some kind of activity that was beneficial to people. And certainly the U.S. Agency for International Development does that. We deal with the needy, the hungry, the starving. So I ended up as a government servant, and I'm proud of that. I felt proud of having done it, but determined I would try to prevent my sons from joining the military if they didn't have to. I never talked about the Marines. I never advised in favor of anything having to do with the military. And my son comes to me, the older one, and says, "Dad, I'm going to join the Naval ROTC in college and become a Marine officer." And I said to my wife, "Where did we go wrong?" And then my younger son, at 17, before graduating high school, said he's going to join the Marines. What? So you're a parent asking, I never talked about that. I want him to go to college. If they had to go in as an officer. Well, the older one would go in as an officer. If they had to go in. And here they end up in the Marines. And then they're being in that first Gulf War together, my 9-month nervous breakdown. Oh, man. It was terrible. But they survived.
How has your time of service affected your feelings towards military service and war?
I feel that everybody should give service to their country. I like the idea of the draft. The draft was very helpful, especially for ghetto youth from broken families or absent fathers, but for others as well. I believe war should be a last resort, obviously. It's unnecessary. But you know, Hitler's death camps weren't shut down by picketers with signs that said, "Be nice." It was shut down by 7 million German soldiers getting killed and 600,000 German civilians getting incinerated in the cities. It's too bad, isn't it? That's what it took. North Korea, look what North Korea would have done to South Korea. When they were kicked out the first time, they found all these executions, massacres committed by the North Koreans, and some of the members of the parliament, South Korean parliament, that thought they weren't going to go south and escape. They thought they could work with it. They were killed. You have to have it. You have to be strong if you want peace. That's it.
What do you think of Korea-U.S. relations today?
I think the Korean people have shown a generosity that is over the top. They can be in the future a source for reawakening Americans to what America has done. American history. The Koreans are saying, look, you should know your own history. We're going to help you learn it. We, innocents, love you if a country can't love you because of what you did. You made possible for millions of Korean men and women, boys and girls, to have life and have life more fully. You did that. And so I think all their programs are they're to the good of both. And I'm really glad to have lived long enough to see it flower and bloom.
Is there anything else that I haven't asked that you wanted to share?
Well, I guess I would say to Americans, get to know more about the Koreans. They were not a democracy that we were defending. Democracy came later. But if they hadn't survived and been saved, God only knows the perdition that they would have to go through. And they are witnesses now to the positive side of American involvement in their affairs.